Okay, I'm Jacob Green, and for my report, I did the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Repeal Act of 2010, which, according to the official language of the bill, provides for repeal of current Department of Defense policy concerning homosexuality in the armed forces. And to put it in perspective, the current Department of Defense policy they were referring to was the law, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And a quick history of that, it was brought into law under President Bill Clinton in 1993, who in his campaign had said he was going to attempt to rid of laws that had been in place since World War II, prior to 1993, that outright banned homosexuality in the military. And while he said that himself that this wasn't the best law to fix it, the law being that while the law, to be sure, was that gays were now allowed to serve in the military, they just weren't allowed to be open, and it had dramatic lifestyle repercussions for them. They had to live a hidden lifestyle, and even they could be ousted at any minute, or outed at any minute, and just be discharged. So the law didn't really actually change anything. You really still couldn't be gay in the military. And he himself said he wasn't too happy with the law. He just said it was the best law at the time. And it really seems to be a good example of what we talk about in class of symbolic policymaking, which is, according to Congress and its members, is congressional policymaking can be more about appearance than substance. And that seems what this appears to be, kind of advancing a law to show something's being done about it and to really begin the knowledge accumulation that ultimately led to Don't Ask, Don't Tell being revoked in 2010. Okay. So, with that being said, the 109th Congress was the first Congress to really make an attempt at repealing this law, and it's really important to understand what the political climate was in this Congress. It was a majority of Republicans in the House, a majority of Republicans in the Senate, and an executive branch headed by President George W. Bush. And it's important to know this because Don't Ask, Don't Tell was an extremely polarized issue. The vast majority of Republicans were against repeal, and the vast majority of Democrats were for repeal. So in order for repeal to work, it was absolutely necessary for a very liberal political climate. Okay, as we learned, and as is known, in order for a law to really be successful, or a piece of legislation to really be successful, it's important that it's really becomes a prominent part of the agenda. And in setting the agenda, there's not the stage of knowledge accumulation. And one of the first things that really led to the knowledge accumulation in Don't Ask, Don't Tell was between 2002 and 2005, news reports began to circulate about the lack of Arab linguists in the U.S. military and a large amount of gay linguists being discharged. And a lot of policy entrepreneurs saw this moment because it became big news. Actually, to put that in perspective, let me show you a quick video.
The Christian Science Monitor today reporting the dearth of Arabic and other Middle Eastern language translators is so severe that the Army is offering a bonus to those who stay in the service or sign up to join it of up to $150,000. But it still won't repeal or even just happen not to apply the moronic Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy.
Okay, and I show you that because it just kind of shows that the media play a big part of the role of, especially with the 24-hour news cycle, the media play a massive part in agenda setting. If it's out there in the media, that means the public are interested in it, the public are learning about it. And it was around this time that really started to happen, albeit that piece of video came from MSNBC, so it was a very impassioned news piece, but it was big news, to put it in perspective. Okay, yeah, and as I just mentioned, this is setting the agenda. And as I said, that last video I showed you and that last incident with the Arab linguist is really a sign of knowledge accumulation, rising awareness of some phenomena. And all of this, what this leads to, this kind of leads to when a policy window is open and then they can advance that piece of legislation. And the 109th Congress were the first to throw a piece of legislation out there. They thought the political policy window was beginning to become kind of open. It wasn't open yet, but they were nudging it open. And in seeing that being nudged open, a bill is introduced by Marty Meehan from Massachusetts. It had 102 co-sponsors, and it was referred to the House Committee on Armed Services, and then it was referred to the Subcommittee on Military Personnel, where it died. And it was very likely to die because of the very Republican climate and the unlikeliness of it being successful. And the reason it was unlikely to be successful was because, okay, it goes to the Senate, they filibustered, there's no way they're going to get the 60 votes. They didn't even have 60 Republicans in the Senate. 60 Democrats in the Senate. There's no way they're going to get the votes for cloture on a filibuster if it's even going to be, brought into conversation. And say for some miracle it was, President George W. Bush would have vetoed it. So the political climate still wasn't ripe for this piece of legislation, even though they began to see the policy window opening. But in doing this, they actually contributed to the snowballing effect that would, later lead to the repeal. Okay. This is the 110th Congress. The 110th Congress was not much different, except that they had a majority of Democrats in the House. But it was still a majority of Republicans in the Senate, where the threat of filibuster still very much existed. And the executive branch was still headed by President George W. Bush, which meant, that threat of the veto was still very, very much there. So yeah, they reintroduced the Military Readiness Enhancement Act, which I was just briefly discussing, which this time had 149 co-sponsors. So that shows that really in Congress it was beginning to become, it was gathering support in Congress, and it was also gathering support in the public, as you'll see in a minute. But this led the same path as the other one. It was referred to the House Committee on Armed Services, and then it was referred to the Subcommittee on Military Personnel, where it died. Shifting tides. This is important to note. So with all that going on before, the political climate not being ripe for the piece of legislation, the tides were beginning to shift. President George W. Bush's approval rating was slipping, and it looked like as we've learned in class, that there's probably it was very highly likely there'd be a Democratic president and a huge shift in Congress. And here's in February, he had a very low approval rating in February of 2007 when that last piece of legislation was introduced. So it just kind of shows that the tides were very much shifting. Okay, policy incubation. I bring up policy incubation because it has a lot to do with what I was just talking about. Policy incubation is keeping a proposal alive while it picks up support or waits for a better climate, or while a consensus begins to form that the problem to which it addresses exists. And that's from Congress and its members. And I bring this up because that's everything that's been happening so far that I've talked about. The news are reporting it, the Congress members are out there talking on it. President Barack Obama campaigned on the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And in the advancing the legislation, it was all a part of the policy incubation period. And as you can see, the shifting tides, Obama's in arguably one of the best, whatever you think about him, arguably one of the best campaigns ever for a president. President Obama's campaign started to begin, so it really looks like this piece of legislation might be about to be ripe. And then the 111th Congress is in session, and it's shifted. It's entirely shifted. It's a great majority in the House of Democrats, a majority of Democrats in the Senate. Note that number 65, the amount necessary to achieve cloture if there was ever a filibuster on a repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And the executive branch, President Barack Obama, who had campaigned, as I mentioned, on the fact that he wanted to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So now it kind of looks like the policy window is wide open. And that's why I have that little picture there. And in showing the shifting tides, as I was talking about earlier, and as I was talking about with the knowledge accumulation and gathering public support, you can actually see that this is a Gallup poll, that the tides really had shifted. And this is, do you favor or oppose openly gay men and lesbian women to serve in the military? and it had a 6% percentage point change among adults, which is pretty big. But a really important number in this Gallup poll is the 12 percentage point change of conservatives. So now 58% from 2004, when just before that first piece of legislation was introduced, it's changed to 58%. So these Republican Congress members and senators, their constituencies, it appears they're starting to be in favor. Even the conservative areas are starting to be in favor of gays openly serving in the military. So that's important. Okay. Now, so if they've seen the policy window wide open, now there's got to be a bill. And it was introduced twice. It was blocked by Senate Republicans by a 57-40 vote the first time in September to even be up for debate. It was blocked. And but they were very clever, because the reason they were able to block it, and the reason a lot of Republicans were adverse to voting for it at that time, is because they hadn't completed a study in the Pentagon about whether or not military readiness would be adversely affected by the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so that's why it was pretty easy for Republicans to block it. Even some liberals voted to block it, or some Democrats, voted to block it. And some Republicans that would later vote in favor of repeal voted to block it because there hadn't been a study completed. And then the study was completed, and the 111th Congress was coming to close. In the lame duck session, the study was released, and they said that the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell presented a low risk to military readiness, which is what they were looking for. And it's important to note that this policy window at this point, because this is out there, it's wide open. And not only is it wide open, it's about to close. They're in a lame duck session, and it's in 2010. And that policy window was about to be really shut because a large influx of Republican Congress members were coming in. Barack Obama got reamed in the midterm elections, and he lost a lot of his Democrats in the House and Senate. And so with the policy window being open, they got it through. And in the House, it got 386 yeses and 41 noes. And in the Senate, it got 65 yeses and 31 noes. And yeah, a lot of those Democrats that wouldn't vote for it before the Pentagon release voted for it. And a lot of a couple of the Republicans, I think it was 8 Republicans in the Senate, voted for it because now not only did they have the political climate they wanted, not only did the public support exist, not only did they have the president they wanted to get it through, but also because there was the study now released. So that was the really brief, wide opening of the policy window. And I just included this little quote from Congress and his members because it really emulates what I believe the trajectory of this policy was. And let me just read it. Laws often embody ideas whose time has come. The right time for a policy is what John W. Kingdon calls the policy window, the opportunity presented by circumstances and attitudes to enact a policy into law. Policy entrepreneurs must seize the opportunity before the policy window closes and the idea's time has passed. Once policies are ripe for adoption, they must gain popular acceptance. This is the function of legitimation, the process through which policies come to be viewed by the public as right or proper. And I bring that up because I think that's exactly what happened with this. There was a couple of events at the beginning, like with the Arab linguists, that brought this into the public sphere. The policy entrepreneurs seized this by enacting or trying to make legislation law and continuing the policy incubation period. And then once the policy window was even more open, with a complete shift in the political climate, they seized the opportunity, albeit at the very last minute. And that's it. Thank you.